Right, well, it appears that we may be streaming. Let's give it a few seconds. It's 12:13 p.m. and we are live again.
Hooray.
With Otto. This time, hopefully, we're going to be able to hear him. So, just waiting for a second to get this. It says it's in an excellent condition. Let's see. It appears that we may be streaming. Right. Let's give it a few seconds. It's 12:13 p.m. No, you may not be coming through. We are live again.
Test. Hooray.
Well, no, Otto, I think that's you. I think that's you, Otto.
I hope it's
We're
me.
going to be able to
With
hear
any
him.
luck.
So,
Hooray.
just waiting for a second to get this. I'm going to wait until you say test, and then I'll know that that's the new thing. That we may be streaming.
Test.
Let's give it a few seconds. It's 12:13
Excellent.
p.m. No, have you just said test again?
So I said excellent. Test. Hooray.
There we go. You did it to confuse me, didn't you? Yes.
No, I
Alright,
said test. And then you said test. And I said, excellent. Which does kind of sound like test.
After that interesting introduction, let's settle down
always interesting here.
into the show. It is always interesting here. This is the Skillful Samsara section.
Also known as the Roberta and Otto show.
No, this is the Skillful Samsara section of the Roberta and Otto show, because the Roberta and Otto show has many flavors. So, we're starting off with this practice to do Skillful Samsara. And so, Otto, welcome back, and so glad that we can be heard this time. And how are you today?
Oh, this is quite good. Very busy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But as usual, a busy day is a good opportunity for Skillful Samsara.
Indeed,
or at least for skill. You're going to be splashing around in a samsaric kind of a realm whenever we go out into the world to engage with it, which we must do perforce. So while we're engaging in it, we cannot help but enter into the reality tunnels of the people around us. Today I was talking with a couple of fellow employees about how to resolve a certain issue, and I had to, of course, enter into the world of, we need to have the electronics checked on this, we have to test this device, and have the concerns of wow, we want to get this done by such and such time and all these things. Now, if I put too much weight, make too much of an emotional investment in these things, I can become very wrought up about if something doesn't get tested by a certain time, or if a certain repair isn't made, before some other event. And I can get so worried about it that I can lose sleep. I can get really, really upset. The emotions will start going, the adrenaline starts going. That's not skillful. That's not helpful. And, we're acting from our ignorance, although I don't know if that's as good a term to use anymore, but in its original meaning of simply not knowing what we're doing. And we have to enter into but at the same time, if I enter into the conversation with well, it doesn't really matter from a cosmic standpoint, and there are much more important things in my life, and really, if this isn't done, what's, are the consequences, all that, earth shattering, maybe we won't be able to attain this or that, but as far as the overview of the company goes, and so forth and so on, that's not going to work either. I won't get the job done, and my coworkers will, you have to talk to people in a way they understand. And it's more than just speaking the language they speak, English or French or whatever. it also has to do with entering, at least to a certain degree, into their reality tunnel, so you can talk to them in a way that they understand. And as a result, you have to not only use the words, but use the concerns and the thoughts of the people that you're talking with. But you can't let their thoughts dominate. It comes back to that center of gravity thing again. If you can remember that you are where you're operating from, and all these things are unfolding around you, right?
Mm-hmm.
That gives you the strength to say, I can do this, I can do that. Not, I am this, I am upset about this. You know, we're not getting this new circuit tested or whatever. Instead, it's like, okay, I'm having this problem coming up. How can I cope with this with as much skill as possible? And that means I have to talk in a certain way. And even, you know, yeah, I say, oh yeah, man, that sucks, you know, and it does. But I can't let it dominate me. You know, there are many things that are a shame, but there's times to express one attitude and times to express another. But you should never really lose that basic attitude, realizing these things are just light overlays. You don't want them to sink down into you, but you want to be able to pick them up and use them enough so that, again, you can communicate clearly. I think a lot of it comes down to communication, which is, of course, related to communing with someone, being in communion. And like I said, it's a lot more than just using words as such. It also has to do with being able to enter, at least at a certain point, into the reality tunnel that's being discussed. When you're talking business, you have to be in a business reality tunnel. You know, if you're doing something recreationally, you're in a recreational. You're going to have a different conversation with someone if you're out fishing than if you're in an office or on a work site or something like that. So these days are a good time for us to practice this. We're not always successful, but we also learn from our mistakes. We can look back and say, geez, you know, I should have done this, I should have done that. How can I not repeat that? How can I improve on that? And then, hopefully, we stop beating ourselves up over it, because that is counterproductive. We have a memory so that we can learn, not to harm ourselves. So, and that can be difficult too, but we can remind ourselves this is the best that you can expect from a human being living in this world that we have, is to look on mistakes. You can regret a mistake. You can say, I don't want to do that again. And you can say, how can I not do that again? And try to remember so that you don't repeat your mistake. But you mustn't beat yourself up over it, dwell on it in a morbid way, or allow it to do more harm than good. Because sometimes that's just a way of the original mistake perpetuating itself. Well, I did that already, and I'm such a bad person, I might as well just do it again. You know, that's the end game for those thoughts. But we don't have to listen to that person inside. You know, we are many. We are not just one. There's many people who have looked into the human psyche have said. So, and there's some we don't want to listen to.
So, Otto, you mentioned it's been a very, very busy day and you've had all these pressures and you've needed to attain this level of objectivity and not assign blame or whatever to a situation. When we're under stress like that and we're very, very busy, it's very difficult to maintain that level of objectivity and to not assign blame or fault or whatever. How do you manage to not slip into those negative patterns of behavior towards your colleagues?
Well, I don't always succeed. None of us do. But I think a big part of it is training the mind, just getting into the habit. If you automatically have your thoughts going, you know, you and I have talked before about the mind has their grooves, and we move down along these grooves very easily. And when we see that where we go, when we follow these grooves, when we see that it's destructive or we want to change it, it can be very difficult, even though we consciously say, geez, I don't want to behave that way. I don't want to think these thoughts or go down this road. You know, I know there's a better way to look at this. I've done it before. I want to do this consistently. Because very often it happens when we have a breakthrough in looking at something, and this is one of the things about using drugs, psychedelic drugs, or actually any kind of drug, anything from the just the tranquilizers and relaxants through the psychedelics. It can help us jump out of these grooves that we realize we don't really want to follow very often. We don't know how to think any other way. So sometimes when we're shocked out of them, we can say, hey, I want to think this way more often. I don't want to follow those grooves, but it's very difficult to get out of them. And one of the problems with these drugs is if you simply use them as a palliative, I just take this drug, this pill or whatever, and you become dependent on that. But I think the wise course is, and not necessarily a drug, through meditation, through contemplation. Sometimes it's just a question of changing your physical diet and your sleep patterns. When you see that there's another way to go, you want to go that way. So it takes a lot of practice. It doesn't happen instantly. Baby steps. We have to take many, many baby steps, but eventually, over years, months certainly, and years, because you never really stop. You start having thoughts like, say, if a coworker fails in a responsibility they have, and you see them, and it's like, well, I could get angry and say, why were you 5 minutes late? Or I could say, well, these things happen. I'm sure he's not feeling good about what happened. Again, you have to know the person. But if I know the person, I know they're not feeling good about what happened. They're apprehensive, and something happened that was completely out of their control. Even though it would not be out of my control, I'm probably 35 or 40 years older than them. And when I was 40 years younger, it probably would have been out of my control too. So a certain level, if he says, what else can I expect? Well, what can we do to see if we can get him a little less, a little more skillful in what he's doing? And so rather than just say, oh my God, he's late, I say, well, I would probably have been, I have been late. And if I was 40 years younger, I would have been living a very different life. It's not right for me, as someone who's 60 years old, to judge a 20-year-old by my level of responsibility, much of which has to do with fading hormonal levels, to tell you the truth, I sometimes suspect, and some wisdom and experience. So, or any kind of a situation when you're dealing with anyone, you can say, well, what else can I expect from people? This is how people are. This is how people behave. They're trapped in their own samsaric soup that they're cooking all the time. The samsara that they're engaging in, and they're speaking to me from a samsaric level. And you can't. It doesn't help a heroin addict to keep yourself addicted to heroin just because that's the. You've got to be clear-headed yourself, but at the same time, you've got to talk their lingo and understand where they're coming from. But it doesn't mean you should sink into it entirely and engage with them at that level. It's the same thing with coworkers or anyone else. But I think a lot of it is training, just teaching yourself to think in a certain way when these things come up, instead of just indulging in that anger or indulging in that frustration. And that's also when it helps to say, in the bigger scheme of things, I'm going home in an hour or whatever. It's just a job. I've had lots, so give yourself that perspective, stepping back, not just framing yourself inside of that, because the person that has talked to you, they've taken on an identity, and they are that identity in their world of mental experience about what's going on. And you want to be in control of your own identity. You don't want their world to define it for you, but at the same time, it's like being an actor. An actor steps out on stage and performs within that world, but is not so insane enough to actually think that the props are real things. He's not going to actually try to drink the prop wine or or stab someone with the prop dagger, which is probably made of rubber or collapses. He can't cut a turkey with it. So.
Yes, indeed. Otto, That was very interesting, very helpful, very informative. Thank you again for making time out of your busy, busy schedule to join me for this little segment. And yeah, do you have any final words before we go?
Well, just I was very glad to be here. It's always a pleasure to chat with you, of course, and I hope that our listeners are enjoying themselves. We'll continue to enjoy ourselves on this end. Hopefully, they'll be enjoying themselves at that end.
Indeed, indeed. And we will be back tomorrow. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you, Otto. Until tomorrow. Goodbye.